Third, reality includes a supernatural dimension. And I want to look at 4 lines of evidence. The first concerns paranormal phenomena. Now, there's a number of these that we could appeal to. I want to talk about one that's reported in the Journal of Anthropological Research, spring 1983, by an anthropologist named Bruce Grindle. Grindle was an atheist. He taught at Florida State University, and he lived among the Sisala people in northern Ghana for a little over a year when he witnessed someone raised from the dead. The person raised was a highly respected drummer in the tribe named Ali. A few days after Ali's death, Grindle was invited to witness the burial ritual. He traveled 5 miles to the village and entered the compound where the corpse was prepared. Grindle writes, quote, "The corpse was already putrid, oozing malodorous juices. An old woman was sitting next to the dead man with a fan. Even though the corpse had been washed about 3 hours earlier, the stench in the room was horrible." End quote. The burial ritual began the following day near midnight. Ali was now dead for 3 to 4 days. The corpse was seated upright against a wall. A group of singers began to dance around it. Grindle said he then, quote, "saw the corpse jolt and occasionally pulsate. The corpse, shaken by spasms, then rose to its feet, spinning and dancing in a frenzy. As I watched, convulsions in the pit of my stomach tied not only my eyes, but also my whole being into this vortex of power. The corpse picked up the drumsticks and began to play. After a while, the corpse was once again sitting propped against the west wall of the compound. In conclusion, I can say with intuitive certainty that on the night of 23 October 1967, I witnessed the raising of the dead. This experience was real and was seen as such by those who sat to my right in the divination place. It was as though everybody present simultaneously touched a live wire. No words were said. Indeed, what could be said? Now, as I mentioned, Grindle was an atheist. He wasn't after this experience. I have spoken with his widow. He died in 2012. I've spoken with one of his former students. And they both say that this experience disturbed him for the rest of his life. And he also gave up his atheism. He never wanted to talk about this experience after getting it put in writing, because obviously that would have been disturbing to see something like this. This kind of paranormal phenomenon, and I could name a lot more, is something that atheism finds it very difficult to accommodate. Second line of evidence is near-death experiences, or NDEs. Now, there are tens of thousands of these, and almost all of them, I should say, you can't corroborate the evidence. You know, there's just not enough evidence to corroborate that they went to hell, or they went to heaven, or they came out of their body, and things like this. Some of them have even been proven fraudulent. But there are, as of now, 300 NDEs that have data that has been corroborated so that the person, while dead, received accurate information they could not have known otherwise. A book just came out this year with 100 of them. It's called The Self Does Not Die, Verified Paranormal Phenomena from Near-Death Experiences. Again, just this year it came out and has 100 corroborated cases in it. Let me just read one of them to you, and this is about a girl named Crystal Mertzlock. She was a 7-year-old girl in Utah. In 1982, she drowned in a community swimming pool, was underwater for 17 minutes, about 17 minutes, and without a heartbeat for at least 45 minutes. Crystal was taken to a hospital where she was eventually stabilized and breathing on her own, but she remained in a coma. 3 days later, Crystal came out of her coma. And this was astonishing in itself, but what she then told the physician, Melvin Moores, who had worked to save her, was even more astonishing. She said she floated outside of her body while dead, and while the physicians and nurses were working to resuscitate her. She provided accurate descriptions pertaining to the physical appearances of the physicians, the number of people in the room, the equipment they had used, the procedures performed on her, and the conversations that took place, all while her eyes were closed and she was profoundly comatose the entire time. Crystal claimed to have gone to heaven while dead. She also said she went to her house. She described what each of her family members were wearing, what they were doing, the toys with which each sibling played, the song one of her sisters sung while playing, and what her mom had cooked for dinner. All of those details ended up being true. Melvin Morse, the physician, says seeing this led him to alter his worldview. He gave up his atheism as a result. Third line of evidence is apparitions, apparitions of the dead. You might call these ghosts, and I know Matt over here, he scorns at ghosts. I wouldn't call them ghosts just because ghosts might have a different definition, but an apparition would be some kind of a spirit being that would appear to another in a form. Usually it's ethereal of some sort. You couldn't touch it. There are a number of these that have corroborating evidence. I know a person who experienced one. In fact, I've known her for about 25 years. Her and her husband, Pat and Doug Ferguson, are really good friends of my wife and I. And Pat, when she was 14 years old, she was asleep and was awakened one Sunday morning, early in the morning, and it was dark, and she figured, oh, I'll go back to sleep. She closed her eyes, and when she opened her eyes, there was this face of a girl about 3 to 6 feet in front of her. I forgot which. About 3 to 6 feet in front of her, a girl she hadn't seen for several years, but was a friend of her, had been a friend of hers. And it scared her. It was illuminated, and it had a frightful look on her face. So she was really afraid. She closed her eyes, figured she was hallucinating or dreaming, and opened them, and it was still there. And she closed her eyes, bit her tongue, pinched herself, did this a couple times, opened her eyes. The face was still there. Finally, pretty scared, she closed her eyes. She did the last thing she knew how to do. She prayed the Lord's Prayer, and when she opened her eyes, the face was gone. She looked over the clock. It was 2:30 Sunday morning. Monday comes and goes. Tuesday morning, she gets up. She comes down for breakfast. Her mom's fixing breakfast. Her dad is reading the paper. He takes the paper, puts it down, turns it around, pushes it toward Pat, and says, Pat, do you know this girl right here? Pat said, yeah, why? She died. What happened? Well, she was at the Scope. That's a big, a center where they play basketball games and hockey games and stuff, an arena. And Saturday night, she had gone to a Loggins and Messina concert. After the concert, she was up in the top row and talking to some friends, leaning up against a curtain. And she thought there was a wall behind the curtain, but there wasn't. So when she leaned back, she fell down 20 feet on concrete. They took her to the hospital, and she died 2:30 Sunday morning. That's kind of freaky. It's spooky. I mean, how do you have it that the face of that person shows up right there in the room in front of her at 2:30, the very moment that she had died? It's very difficult to explain under an atheistic worldview. Very easy under theism. Radically answered prayer. Now, I'm not just talking about the kind of prayers, Lord, I'm traveling from San Jose, driving up to Sacramento for this afternoon's event. Please get me safe. And I get here safe. Oh, God answered my prayer. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Who knows? I'm talking about radically answered prayer. I've been a Christian for 45 years. I can say there's probably, I could count them on a single hand, radically answered prayer that I've experienced. But I'm going to give you just one, and it doesn't come from me. It comes from an atheist who used to be a Christian. And years ago, I think it was 2008 or 2009, we were involved in an email exchange, and we talked about the evidence for the resurrection. And then I brought up miracles, and he said, yeah, I'd been there, done that. You know, when I was much younger, I went to church with my dad, and my dad was a deacon or something like that. We had a small church, and he wrote the following. One time my church desperately needed $7,641 in order to keep going. After an all-night prayer meeting, my dad went to pick up the mail, and in it was a check for exactly $7,641 from someone who didn't even know the church needed the money, but had heard one of the pastors speak a few years ago. My dad contacted the giver, and she said that after she'd heard the pastor speak, she felt God wanted her to put some cash in an annuity and give it to our church. The process took several years, and just days before, she decided to close the account and send the accrued money to the church. And it happened to be the exact amount that was needed right after an all-night prayer meeting. He'd go on just a few lines later and say, so I looked as hard as I could, but finally I realized I had no good reasons to think God existed. So we've got some radically answered prayer, and we could give just so many different, and I'm sure if there's some Christians here in the audience, you could probably maybe think of a couple for yourself that you've experienced. These fit far more in line with theism than atheism. So the conclusion, there is a strong case that reality includes a supernatural dimension, and there's a strong case that the universe and life itself are products of a designer. Now, design and the supernatural, They are not at home within atheism. Atheism cannot accommodate them. However, they fit right at home in theism, the belief that God exists and acts in our world. And so when I look at two conflicting worldviews, of course they both can't be right. When I look at both worldviews, I'm going to look at the things, the evidence we have, the data that I experience, that I can see going on in our world, in our reality, and I'm going to go with the worldview that accommodates that.